Okay, now I would like to talk about the validation process for the SDIS and the SDIS revised. Um, it's important, even though it's very boring to talk about validation and development, it's really important for you to understand the strengths of this instrument because we took a look first at all the instruments out there. And even those that were developed by famous sleep specialists had a lot of flaws in them. So we tried to uh, develop an inventory that does not have those flaws that can affect the accuracy of the instrument. So I'm going to go through and do a few comparisons. First off, one of the biggest differences between the SDIS and other inventories out there is that it had an actual content validation committee, which no other instrument out there has. And this is a group of 9 professionals that are considered experts in their field. And they basically wrote a large pool of questions. They were asked to write questions that would help identify the major sleep disorders that children and adolescents can have. And so they did that. And then, after we had this great big large pool of questions written by these experts, we had each expert rate the questions on how well they were identifying and what they were identifying, which sleep disorder were they identifying. And basically, these 9 experts were, 6 of them were pediatric sleep specialists that are very well known, or one was an adult sleep specialist. But most of them were very well known in their field. And you can see on the content validation section of the website, it was W. McDowell Anderson, who is an MD and pulmonologist and director of the sleep clinics at James A. Haley Hospital in Tampa. And he was the former president of the Southeastern Sleep Disorders Association. We had Christine Acebo. Dr. Acebo is a professor of instrumentation and methodology and statistics and mathematics at Brown University. She also works at a sleep hospital and has written many professional articles on sleep disorders. The third was Dr. Mary Carskaden, who is maybe the most famous of all of these sleep experts. And she is kind of like considered the mother of sleep medicine. And she is a professor of neuro and biobehavioral sciences, sleep deprivation, and biological rhythms at Brown University. And she is director of the sleep lab at E.P. Bradley Hospital in Providence, Rhode Island. She was one of the co-developers of the multiple sleep latency test used to help to diagnose narcolepsy and sleep deprivation. She's been the president of the Sleep Research Society. She has authored various books and many professional sleep articles. So she helped develop these questions. The fourth was Dr. Gayan Falone, who is a clinical psychologist and professor of neurophysiology at Brown University. He has written many sleep articles. Dr. William Kohler is a pediatric neurologist and former medical director at the Sleep Center in Billings, Montana. And at the time, he was the director of the Pediatric Sleep Center at University Community Hospital in Tampa, Florida. He has also authored many journal articles on sleep. Dr. Amy Wolfson is professor of psychology at the College of Holy Cross in Worcester, Massachusetts. She has authored many articles on excessive daytime sleepiness, delayed sleep phase syndrome, and insomnia. The seventh was Dr. Chatterjee, who is a professor of measurement and evaluation and education at Columbia University, and she has published many professional articles on how to develop accurate sleep, well, not just sleep, but any type of screening or any type of inventory, how you can develop an accurate one. And she really looked at this tool, the SDIS, carefully to make sure that the questions were written specifically and accurately, and that the Likert scale was defined, the scoring scale was defined clearly for parents, so there was no doubt how they were rating their child. They weren't guessing. She also gave feedback for Asian American readers. Then the 8th was Dr. Deborah Rose, who is assistant professor of school psychology at the University of South Florida and a school psychologist. She rated the SDIS items for cultural bias and clarity in the view of an African American reader. We had number 9 was Dr. Rosa Assing Tucker, who is a bilingual school psychologist in Tampa, and she translated the SDIS questions and rated the SDIS items for cultural bias and clarity from the viewpoint of a Hispanic reader. And then we had another Hispanic hospital professional that typically translates English into Spanish for medical surveys and things like that, and she helped with the Hispanic translation. So these people all contributed to the items, and then they rated them. The sleep specialist rated them on how well each item identified a major sleep disorder like obstructive sleep apnea or delayed sleep phase syndrome or narcolepsy. They had 94% agreement, these sleep specialists, on which items should be included in the SDIS. So the content validity here was 94%, which is very, very high for a screening instrument. No other sleep screening instrument out there has even done content validation on their items. So that was the first step. Also, if you look at the item rating scale, there is a 7-point Likert scale. Let me see if I can bring this up. There's a 7-point Likert scale here. If you look that goes from a score of 1, which is never, up to the extreme is 7 is always, and always means your child exhibits this behavior multiple times per hour, daily or nightly. So all these definitions of these 7 points are very clear for parents, and there's no guessing. All the other inventories out there just say maybe never or sometimes or always, but they don't give any definition for parents. So the parents really don't know what a sometimes means. Does a sometimes means the behavior occurs once a month or once a week or three times a day? Nobody knows. So that is a problem that makes many inventories or causes inaccuracy in ratings for parents that the SDIS does not have. So if you look, I'd like to also now look at the norming sample of the SDIS, because it is a special sample of 821 students, children and adolescents from 2 through 18 years of age, and they came from 45 different schools, 2 psychology private practices, and 7 pediatric sleep centers nationwide, 6 of which were American Academy of Sleep Medicine accredited sleep centers. And there was a pilot study with 226 subjects, and in that pilot study, we looked at how parents were rating the questions, and we did exploratory factor analysis, and we threw out the bad questions, which were not doing a good job of identifying sleep disorders. So we got rid of them, and then we went to the main study sample of 595 subjects. 60% were male and 40% were female, and these subjects reflected the 2000 and the 2010 U.S. Census demographics very well for race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, and parent education levels. So we had about 74% who were Caucasian. There was 59%, 59 or 10%, which were African American, 10% were African American, 9% were Hispanic, 5% were multicultural, 2% were Asian American, and then about 1%, not even 1%, about 0.2% were other races. And this is important, that the sample reflects the demographics, the census demographics, and also that this sample is taken from various regions of the USA, which this was. These children were taken from the southeastern United States, the mid-Atlantic United States, central, and the western regions of the USA. And this is very important, all this, because if you're going to use a questionnaire nationwide, you need to gather your sample nationwide. And if you're going to use a sample with different races or with different socioeconomic levels, which most sleep specialists do, you need to have an instrument that is normed and standardized on that exact population. And the SDIS is the only one in the world that does this, or in the United States, I guess I should say, for U.S. children. And the others out there that are being used have only been developed in 1 or 2 sleep centers in one area of the United States, usually by only 1 or 2 sleep specialists, they're usually well-known sleep specialists, so that's why people start using them. But they don't realize that they were normed on a very specific sample. And so if they're saying their instrument is 85 or 90% accurate, sensitive in identifying children with obstructive sleep apnea, then really what they're saying is their instrument is only been identifying children who are from mainly one race and one area of the United States, and 1 or 2 different socioeconomic levels. So their instrument may be good when being used with upper middle class parents, but can it be accurate if somebody from a lower socioeconomic level or another race is using it? And they really don't know, because they haven't normed it on all these different demographics of the United States. So I hope that makes a little sense to you. In the pilot study, we used All Children's Hospital in St. Petersburg, which it has now been taken over by Johns Hopkins, and it's one of the centers of it's called Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital now. And we used Tampa General Hospital also. In the main study, we had a lot of well-known sleep clinics that really knew what they were doing. And we had Carl Regional Sleep Disorder Center in Urbana, Illinois, with Dr. Daniel Piketty, who is an expert in identifying periodic limb movement disorder and restless leg syndrome. But they also identified all other sleep disorders too. We had Johns Hopkins Pediatric Sleep Centers with Dr. Ann Hallbauer, who Johns Hopkins is a very famous pediatric sleep center for identifying any type of sleep disorder. Miami Children's Hospital with Dr. Marcel Duray. They had a very big Hispanic population that we used to make sure we were norming it also on Hispanics. We had Stanford Sleep Disorders Clinic, which is a very famous sleep hospital with well-known, renowned Dr. Rafael Paleo and Dr. Emmanuel Mignot, who are 2 of the top sleep specialists in the world. and we had University Community Hospital in Tampa with Dr. William Kohler, and he is an expert neurologist and sleep specialist who diagnoses many, many different sleep disorders. So those were the hospitals we used, which, it's really special that we had not only many hospitals around the United States, but we had many renowned sleep specialists helping us that really knew what they were doing. During the pilot study that I mentioned previously, the exploratory factor analysis indicated that there were 4 scales being validated for children and 5 scales for adolescents. Now you see here on the screen the children's revised SDIS, and this goes from ages 2 through 10 years of age. And then the validation study, the exploratory factor analysis, indicated that there needs to be a separate inventory for adolescents. And this adolescent inventory goes from 11 through 18 years of age. And the reason for this is that younger children don't always show all the same sleep characteristics as the older adolescents. And also, there are some sleep disorders that usually only pop up in adolescence, like narcolepsy. So on the children's screener, narcolepsy was not one of the scales, but it was on the adolescent survey. Also, some of the questions, the severity that parents rated adolescents, they rated them more severe on various characteristics like snoring for obstructive sleep apnea, or gasping and choking and things like that, than they did for children. So the problem with most sleep inventories is they combine all these age groups together. And so what they may be doing is over-identifying the adolescents and under-identifying the children. And so it's very important that we have 2 different sleep inventories to measure these problems carefully. Okay, let me try to get back to where I was. All right. So after the exploratory factor analysis, then the main study was conducted after the bad items were thrown out and after we developed 2 inventories. And in the main study, there were 595 students. And like I said, there were 45 schools represented, 2 private practices represented. So we had a very big community sample of children who were not being referred for a sleep disorder. And this is important when developing a sleep inventory, because most of the inventories that have been developed, they're just looking at a hospital sample and looking to see how well their inventory identifies that hospital sample of children, let's say, who have been found to have obstructive sleep apnea. But this is, when they give those validity scores in the maybe 80s and 90s, you have to look at them with some wariness, because it's easy for any sleep inventory to predict the bad kid, not bad as in bad behavior, but kids who have a bad case of, let's say, obstructive sleep apnea, or more severe periodic limb movement disorder. It's much easier to identify. Those are the kids that are usually being referred to the sleep clinics, because those are the ones that maybe the pediatricians notice or parents complain about to the pediatrician, and they get referred to the sleep clinics. So an inventory is going to be pretty accurate at identifying those kids that are more severe, that really stand out. The question of a good inventory is, can they identify the community sample kids who maybe are milder but they still need a sleep study because they have mild obstructive sleep apnea or mild narcolepsy or mild periodic limb movement disorder. And so often, if you were to test their inventories on a very wide community sample, some of these other inventories may not be nearly as accurate in picking up the mild kids. So this is why you need a big community sample to test your instrument on. And the sleep inventory for students does have a pretty big sample. When doing confirmatory factor analysis, that is really confirming that, yes, those sleep scales that the exploratory factor analysis identified, yes, this is confirming that they are valid sleep scales, that the items are measuring well those sleep disorders. And so if you're getting a fit on its subscales of 80 or above, that is usually very good. And for the for the children's inventory, the sleep disorders inventory for students, we got a 0.90 fit on all the subscales, those 4 subscales. So it was confirmed that this instrument is measuring those 4 subscales well. And then for the adolescents, that was a 5-factor scale, we were able to get even higher than 90% fit. So that is very good. And for these scales, the children's is measuring sleep-related breathing disorder, which goes from normal, not having a breathing disorder at all, up to goes through upper airway resistance syndrome, and then of course the more severe obstructive sleep apnea. So this scale is covering that range of breathing disorders. It also reported the exploratory factor analysis reported that it's measuring periodic limb movement disorder, it's measuring excessive daytime sleepiness, and it's measuring either behavioral insomnia of childhood, that's for little children who have trouble going to sleep at night, to the adolescent insomnia, which is delayed sleep phase syndrome. It's measuring that. It's measuring excessive daytime sleepiness, and it's the scales obtain an overall or a total sleep disturbance index, SDI, which is basically showing how much these sleep problems are interfering with the child's daytime functioning and and also nighttime functioning, I should say. So that's what the confirmatory factor analysis confirmed. And then for the adolescents, it confirmed that all those sleep scales I just mentioned, plus narcolepsy, are being assessed accurately or clearly. And so that's what the sleep disorders inventory measures at this point. And I'm going to talk about each of those scales in a later soundbite. As far as the overall hit rate or predictive validity, of the children's forum, it was 86% accurate in predicting both whether the child had these different sleep disorders or whether they did not have these different sleep disorders. So your sensitivity and specificity. The adolescent one was even more accurate. It had a predictive validity rate of 96%, and that's kind of typical because as the child gets older, the sleep disorder usually gets more severe. So it's easier identifying adolescents than it is 8-year-olds or 10-year-olds. And it's really easier identifying 8 to 10-year-olds than it is a little 3 or 4-year-old. So you get more accuracy as the child gets older. For the overall, the total SDI score, we had a sensitivity of 0.82, which is good. For the subscales, which is sleep-related breathing disorder, we had a 0.91. Periodic limb movement disorder, 0.50, which is not good, and I would like to explain that to you why. It's happened on other sleep scales like the the pediatric sleep inventory, I think, that was developed by Dr. Shervin, also did not get real high periodic limb movement disorder validity scores, but there is a reason for that. It's not so much that these instruments are not measuring it right. They may be measuring it much more accurately than an overnight sleep study, but a polysomnography. But the problem is that this disorder only happens sometimes every other night or 3 times a week, or, maybe a child might have it 4 or 5 nights in a row, and then 4 or 5 nights they don't have any problems. So it's an inconsistent sleep disorder. So if you're doing an overnight sleep study on a child for 1 night, and that child doesn't have it that night, then the sleep lab is going to say this child doesn't have periodic limb movement disorder, even if that child may have it 6 other nights of the week. And so in this sense, a sleep inventory might be more accurate in measuring PLMD than an overnight polysomnography test. And now they are actually using actigraphy and other home sleep study instruments to measure this that may be even more accurate, definitely more accurate than a polysomnography. So anyway, continuing on the SDIS, the children's rating on behavioral insomnia of childhood or delayed sleep phase syndrome, we had a 1.0, and this is really because they don't do sleep studies here with this. It's just parent report. So if the parent reports that the child is having these problems, the doctor or the sleep inventory actually has lots of recommendations for parents that they can use to decrease or get rid of BIC or delayed sleep phase syndrome. And usually this doesn't take a referral to an overnight sleep study if the parent is given the right recommendations, which our instruments, our reports do produce. And these recommendations have been developed by leading sleep specialists in this area. For EDS, excessive daytime sleepiness scale, that's not really a sleep disorder. So you can't really, say this has a validity score since it's not a sleep disorder per se, but it's a consequence of a sleep disorder. And all these other sleep disorders, like the sleep-related breathing disorder, or PLMD, all those different ones, they can cause EDS. And if a child is scoring high on EDS, then one of 2 things is happening. If the child has a high, let's say, score on sleep-related breathing disorder, then that sleep disorder is causing the EDS in this child. If the child did not score high on any of these other sleep disorders, then it very well could be that the child has narcolepsy. The beginning of narcolepsy is EDS. And so that definitely, if it's really giving the child a lot of problems, that may need to be ruled out, narcolepsy. And in mainly in the main study that I did on this instrument, we had about 4 or 5 children who were under the age of 10 that had been diagnosed with narcolepsy, even though it's quite rare. we had those children in the study provided by Stanford, and but most kids do not have onset for narcolepsy until adolescence. So anyway, going to the sensitivity of the SDIS, the adolescent version, the overall sleep disturbance index was 0.81, which is good. The sleep-related breathing disorder here was 0.92. Periodic limb movement disorder and restless legs was 0.55. For the same reason, this score was not too good as the children's, that these kids may not exhibit it every night on a sleep study. The delayed sleep phase syndrome again was high, 1.0, and the narcolepsy was 0.88. So the sensitivity, in other words, is this instrument identifying children who really have these sleep disorders? The sensitivity is good to high. And when we go to the specificity, or in other words, if the instrument is saying the child does not have one of these sleep disorders, is it accurate that the child really doesn't have the sleep disorder? And for specificity, the SDIS children's total score was 0.95. The sleep-related breathing disorder was 0.62. And we would like for that to be higher. We think it is higher now because what happened is the new scoring has come out for children, which is lower. Children could be identified with obstructive sleep apnea now at a much lower score, a milder score on the polysomnography than earlier. It's like half the score now. So we did adjust this, the sleep-related breathing disorder scale. We made it the cutoff 2 points milder to reflect that change in polysomnography, and we think that score will now be higher, but we really need to check it out. Periodic limb movement disorder was 0.93, so if the parents say the kid does not have this kicking around and stuff like that, then they really almost always don't. Okay, so it may not be great in identifying if they do because of the irregularity of the kicking around at night, but it's very accurate when parents say the child doesn't have it. With BIC and delayed sleep phase syndrome in children, it was 0.98, and that is very high. For the adolescent, the total sleep disturbance index was very high at 0.95. The sleep-related breathing disorder was 0.92, the validity. The periodic limb movement disorder and restless legs was 0.91. Delayed sleep phase syndrome was 0.98. Narcolepsy 0.97. So this rating scale is really accurate, both the children's and the adolescent. If the parents haven't rated any sleep problems as being significant, that everything's coming out in the normal range, then it is very accurate in being correct there. And so definitely when professionals are getting normal scores, they can be very sure that the child is having normal sleep and does not have any of these sleep problems. With internal consistency, that is a form of reliability where the instrument is, or the study is looking at all the questions within the sleep-related breathing disorders section. Are they correlating high with each other? So if the parent rates that the child is snoring, if they rate that fairly high, then are they also rating other problems, other items within that scale, like choking or gasping or sweating a lot at night or things like that? Are they rating those high too? And so for internal consistency, it was also got some pretty high scores here in the 80s and 90s For everything but BIC and delayed sleep phase syndrome, it was a little bit lower at 0.76. So in this area, kids could have 3 or 4 items that were rated high, but maybe one wasn't. But it really doesn't matter because the validity on the sensitivity and the specificity for BIC and delayed sleep phase was very high. So that one little item or two that's maybe not totally in sync with the others is not a really significant issue. For the retest reliability, the children's inventory had a reliability score of 0.97 for the overall inventory, and it had also for the adolescents a 0.86. I see there's a mistake here. It should be the A there, the adolescent, that's a 0.86. So the reliability was very good also on these instruments.